you.
So how did stuff go?
Yeah, sort of, I guess, I don't know, middling. I reviewed the conversation stuff this morning and updated the tree. I haven't, like the longer messages that we got into, I haven't, really shortened those down or anything, but I think that's okay for the minute. I do realize though, like one thing that occurred to me is that there is now, like, the breadth of the conversation is such that it's not tenable to like continue all the things. Like previously, it would have been fairly easy to like make the mistake of trying to continue lots, but it's uh yeah, it's pretty broad now.
Are a lot of them open issues where you have questions or objections?
Um, there are things that haven't been like either directly responded to. Um, so I also realized there were some messages that I missed that I didn't end up like reading. Like I wasn't able to keep up enough to read everything as you posted it. Um,
Yeah, what I'm wondering is if all the branches are problematic or if some are unproblematic at this point.
no, some aren't problematic. Um, like so there's stuff like this and whatever else, and then there's things that are like supportive of the other things. So I don't think there are too many like problematic branches. Um,
I'm just
I
wondering how
don't
many
know.
there would be that have to be continued in order to resolve everything.
Um, maybe about half of the endpoints by an estimate. There is
Okay,
some
still a
stuff.
fair amount.
Yeah. There's some stuff like when I posted like a list of half a dozen or whatever ways that I thought genes might be able to do something. Some of which weren't worth continuing with, but there's like this element here just reflects all that. Yeah. There's some longer stuff that, I mean, a lot of the questions that haven't been responded to. So, like, you've got a question here: how could genes do that? That is maybe slightly rhetorical, but isn't answered at least. So there's some stuff like that would be easy. There's harder stuff like, yeah, the difference between the. Oh, I guess we talked about that in voice. So that's sort of okay. I mean, this doesn't need any extra stuff because we've sort of agreed to drop that thing. I don't think this needs a response either. So there's maybe not as much as I thought, actually.
Okay, I'm
That
looking at your notes.
Yep.
Part of the stuff with breaks and spreading things out, yeah, are you like go too hard on some days and then skip days entirely of trying to get stuff done?
Mm.
I'm wondering. That's a question.
Oh yeah. No, I do. I'll like this weekend I focused a lot on coding stuff because there were some things there that I thought were urgent. Or at least there's a decent amount of work in a short, like 2 weeks to get it done, sort of thing. So I've like prioritized that stuff a bit. But yeah, I'll do something like all weekend I worked on that and didn't really do anything else.
Well,
So I'll
coding's
go.
not necessarily a break. Like, are you talking about coding that requires like a significant amount of mental energy to think about what you're doing, or is it like easy coding?
Oh, so I didn't mean the break was like this weekend that just happened. I meant the one
Oh, okay.
beforehand and then the first half of last week.
Oh yeah, I didn't actually read it carefully. I see last.
Yeah, last weekend, like I don't like that as a reference because we use last week and this weekend sort of interchangeably, and like this week can be ambiguous. So um, it's not great, but yeah, I meant like the last weekend of September there. And then, so basically, like the last bit of September and then until October. Um, so the coding stuff was all Flux related. It wasn't super like I find most of the time coding isn't that uh like you need a like a consistent sort of mental or like consistent focus, but it doesn't necessarily need to be super high intensity. Um, some bits of code do, like particularly if you're writing like a new technical algorithm or something, then that can be something that like takes a lot of energy. But a lot of it, I mean, this weekend was um one of the things was uh like scraping uh the data on current bills from the Western Australian Parliament website. Um, so there's like some stuff to think about there, but it's not, super difficult. Which I think is one of the reasons I could spend like all weekend doing it, like more than 24 hours that weekend.
Is there a reason for trashy literature? Like, is there an advantage to it?
Um, the we started talking about it. Connor's got uh like I guess a bit of an interest in um the history of romance novels, maybe like why and how they exist, and in such volume. Anyway, so we were talking on Friday night and just sort of catching up, and we ended up reading like Amazon reviews for some. But the reason that I was sort of okay with it was that they're particularly easy. Like they're designed to be read really quickly, and so
Okay, yeah, I thought that might be the advantage, but um, there are better books that are also have that same advantage. I don't think
yes,
trashy
yeah,
is necessary. Like juveniles, for example, Heinlein and Sanderson have some that are aimed at like an eighth grade reading level or something, so they're
yeah.
quite easy to read.
I started reading. I think I mentioned it some of it. I started reading.
Have spacesuit will travel. I think that's a juvenile, although I'm not positive offhand.
It's. I mean, it seems likely. It's fairly like it's easy to read. It's fun, and in the first few pages, the issue of like this kid being like halfway through high school is brought up, so it feels young adult sort of stuff at best, teenage
Yeah, I
young
mean,
adult.
plenty of stories have young adult characters without being juveniles, but it is
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
common in juvenile.
it didn't feel particularly um like particularly
Yeah,
anything.
his juveniles tend to be around 200 pages and 70,000 words,
Okay, yep, yep.
which is shorter than most books.
That's I mean, it's a good few hours, but it's something you should be able to get through in an afternoon, I imagine.
Yeah,
One should be able to. Obviously, yeah. Um, with speed reading practice and stuff, you can get a lot better. But yeah. Um, so yeah, my sort of intent is to do that like in parallel. One of the reasons that like this might be like good for me is uh like if Connor and I like talk about it next weekend, then it's a reason to like do it other than just for the practice of reading. Like there's extra goals that it meets that aren't particularly important, but in terms of practicing reading, the content isn't really important at this stage either, provided that it's easy enough not to be an issue.
yeah, but like stuff like Heinlein has some value in the content, but
Yes.
if having someone to talk with about it is more valuable than that, that's fine too.
Well, I wouldn't mind talking to Connor about a lot of the Heinlein stuff as well. Like a
Yeah,
lot
if
of
he
what we've
would
talked about.
read it.
I wouldn't expect that he'd have any trouble. He reads a lot more than I do. Um, uh,
Yeah, that might work then.
so we've over the past like 2 years discussed uh, Book of the New Sun as I was reading it. Oops, that's the wrong monitor. I just realized. Um, uh, I was reading it because he started reading it, and there was a podcast that we both listened to that like discussed it as it went along, which is quite useful for a book like this, um, or a series. Uh, but yeah, but we've like talking with him about a book has been like a thing that's helped me read stuff in the past. Um, so I think that's not a bad sort of approach at this stage. At the very least, I started reading, Have Spacesuit Will Travel 2 weeks ago. and I haven't really continued it much, even though it seemed interesting. So yeah, but that's actually that's a sci-fi book that I've hesitated to whoops, that's the wrong one. Hesitated to suggest as one of the ones that, like, in your book suggestions thread. Um, I don't know if you'd like it, but it's Dying Earth genre and set fire in the future, which is interesting at least.
The new Sun one?
Yeah, there's a lot of uh religious allegory types. It's not a religious book, but the author's Catholic, was Catholic, and um, in terms of reading in, like, there's a lot to read into, sort of thing. So without the companion podcast, I'm not sure I would have enjoyed it at all or understood what was going on. So it's sort of not necessarily an easy thing to recommend, but yeah, but it was definitely enjoyable how I read it.
Okay, by the way, regarding understanding romance novels and their history, I think that project will not have much success without familiarity with pickup artist stuff. There's significant knowledge about what romance is, and I think if you just look at mainstream blue pill stuff, you'll never get it. You'd have to reinvent everything.
Yeah, I don't know how Connor would come at it. But to sort of, I mean, give you some context from his point of view, because it's not, I'm not particularly interested in it. Um, but like, he makes, um, what do you call it? Like, I mean, this is a 37-minute video on uh, Annihilation and the. I'm not sure if these are both films, but Stalker is based on Roadside Picnic. Um, so he's got a lot more literature background, but I don't think, yeah, much in the way of pickup artist stuff. Though that'd be an interesting thing to talk to him about. Because I agree. Like he's aware that they're evidently solving something, and there's like one of the themes in the author, like the author that we bought this book from, Tasha Black maybe. She's has like a 2 to 3 week turnaround time for a 180-page book. It's 180 pages. I think that's Kindle pages. And she's prolific. And there's a super common recurring theme, which is like, so there's attractive men, that's fine, but with babies. And neither of us particularly understood why babies were so sexy.
The men are married with babies or
No, they're single with babies. Often, like, I mean, one of the books
single
is like,
fathers.
uh, often their wife has like died or something. So they're not necessarily like flawed bad boys type thing.
I think that there's markets for a lot of things. Like tastes vary. Rather than that being like a particularly important thing, I think there's just like if you find a niche that only a fraction of people like, you can still sell a lot of books. And specializing helps sales. So that would be my first guess about what's going on.
So yeah, she's really popular. So obviously the men are more common than the babies at this point. This is the Alien Bride thing that I searched for particularly though.
And yeah, the turnaround time is not that surprising. These books are often written at like fanfic quality.
Oh yeah, yeah, and some of the reviews like reflect that, like shallow characters, boring, whatever. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I tried to find out what like proper romance novels were, like if there were ones that were written like real books. So I found like Judy Blume as one of the bigger older names. And I read one of her books and it was absolutely fanfic quality,
Oh wow.
despite her having a reputation as more of a real author. It's not like
Uh,
so it's long before like Kindle and Kindle authors and that kind of stuff, but it was this the writing quality was just not a real author, basically. Like, can write words on a page that are coherent but doesn't know like writing techniques and stuff.
yep.
Or doesn't care
Um,
about them, take your pick.
have you read The Time Traveler's Wife by any chance?
No.
So that's, I mean, I don't know if you, it's science fantasy, if anything. It's sort of set in the modern day, but there's uh, like one thing that occurred to me reading it. There's a few. I'm not sure if there's more than one sex scene, but at least there's one reasonably graphic sex scene. Um, towards the end, I think that like I'm not sure if you can have a romance novel that's like proper writing because then it sort of becomes something else by the virtue of having other writing stuff. Like, could you? Is it possible to write one that's like only really concerned with romance? Because it feels like the reason that a lot of these books are romance. Well, they've got like three genres in the name. It'll be like paranormal, sci-fi, romance. Is Tasha Black describing her stuff? I think. Um, so it's sort of like if romance is a dominant theme, then it's like it can't have any others sort of thing. And then how you, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
No, I think you could have normal quality writing, like regular novels, and just stick to romance scenes and events and themes and so on.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
I don't really see the issue.
I wonder, it would sort of surprise me if people haven't tried it at some point. I can imagine them not being popular though, and thus hard to find.
Yeah, yeah, it probably has existed, but it's not
Um,
standard.
yeah,
Yeah, but it's just I found it noticeable because you can read like random other genres like Western or detective, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, like take your pick. And there's sort of a consistency to what a book is across all of them, as far as I know, and from what I've seen, that romance just like violates with
yeah. Well,
lower quality.
so this is sort of an interesting, like, is something like Pride and Prejudice, would you include that in,
I haven't read it, so I don't know. Like
um,
I suspect it
I've
might
read,
not be a real romance novel. Like I think it might be a book with a romantic plot, which is kind of different.
I don't think there's any sex scenes in it. I'm not sure. Um,
Yeah, I don't think sex is necessary, but like there's sort of a focus on just dating and courtship in romance novels. Um, and I don't know the plot of Pride and Prejudice, but I think it has like other stuff in it. It's not quite the same kind of thing.
I mean, a central part of the, like one of the main sort of plot line is around courtship between Mr. Darcy and uh, the female protagonist. Um, and there's like multiple suitors, and it goes through like essentially them falling in love, but via like this other stuff that goes on in the way with the other suitors. Um, so I guess there's like 18th century political stuff in there, or 18th century, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Might be.
Anyway, it's not very long in any case. But yeah, so
Okay, so with the discussion, are there parts that you want to continue? What do you think would be useful to you, or should we do something else? Was
um,
that like a good experiment and time to move on? Or do you want to follow up on some of it?
I think it was a good experiment in terms of move on slash follow up. Um, maybe just we'll take a moment to skim some stuff because I think there was some good things in here that I'm not sure I understand fully. Um, I thought it was good that you spotted the memes thing, um, with regards to the Lindy Beige video, because I sort of regarded that video quite highly, particularly because he, like, deals with some criticism at the start and explains, like, a lot of the reason for needing something like that, and does a decent sort of, uh, I feel like a pretty decent job of, like, developing the theory as he goes along. Um,
In
but the
general, all evolutionary psychology stuff is terrible. That's just how the field is.
mm,
I would be surprised if you found any that I couldn't tear apart.
so I'm not sure how much of it was of the theory was particularly evolutionary psych. I mean, I know he's got some training in evolutionary psychology or something similar. Um,
It seemed like that genre of thing was his point.
yeah, I don't think it necessarily needs to be, particularly because it's sort of uh, like in terms of the timeline for actually just speaking about evolutionary psychology, how does that even work? Like, what's the time period where that's taking effect? Because like we know that changes over the last few like hundreds of thousands of years have been pretty minimal, and before that, did we really have psychology? Like, what does psychology mean in like,
They
you
don't
know,
think about memes and those topics anything similar to me and DD. So they
yeah,
don't have coherent answers to what you're trying to ask from an FI perspective, which is part of
yeah,
why
yeah,
the whole field is all wrong and bad.
yeah. No, that makes sense. I don't know if they'd just attempt to like dodge the question because like time periods of when evolutionary psych stuff was active is a fairly straightforward question. It's not, you know,
Yeah,
I don't think
so
it's particularly
I think
controversial.
it's the same as trying to talk to less wrong about induction. It's not that individual people dodge the question in discussions, although they might, but that's not the main issue. The main issue is there's no one to ask. There's no one to dodge the question because no one is responsible for answering it in the first place.
Yeah,
Like, a lot of people won't answer you, but they won't regard it as dodging the question because they never agreed to answer it. But there's
yeah,
nowhere to like actually get answers about things. There's no paths forward.
and then also if it remains like unanswered and because individual actors are autonomous or whatever just stays unanswered, people don't see that as a problem. Um, as in there's internal and external issues from the same problem or the same sort of situation, that being like no one's taking responsibility.
Yeah, it's just very hard to get short, productive conversations with people to get basic points answered. Like, do you think someone should be taking responsibility and giving organized answers to critics? Um, people generally don't want to do that.
Yeah. In terms of other stuff in the conversation, this point here, um, that like a question version at the same length is blah. Um, there's some stuff like that that I think is like a good point and useful, but not particularly important to continue in the conversation. Um, but that's sort of exactly what I was looking for as an answer, which was good.
I didn't think that was hard to write. I'm not sure like what went wrong in your thought process or how you missed it or whatever. I don't know if you want to analyze that or not. Um, but yeah, I don't have a mental model of what the error was.
It feels like there's a class of errors that we often put down to stuff like, oh, I didn't think about that. Like it's sort of implying that if we spent more, like if we as in someone like me in that situation, if I spent a bit more time thinking about it, then there was a good chance I would have like come to that on my own, or that it's obvious once someone points it out to us. So there wasn't like any intuitive hurdles to get over. It was just a matter of putting the words together in the right order. Um, those sort of errors, I mean, I think most of the time we just pass over them. It's like, oh, should have thought of that, and then never think about it again. Um, in some ways, maybe it's related to like the stuff I put in the postmortem, but I don't know. I think it's one of those, though, I guess is the point.
Do you mean that uh, if you had thought about it more, you would have come up with it, or you wouldn't, and it just seems obvious in retrospect?
There's a good chance I would have in this case. Other similar
Okay.
problems, not necessarily. It's not really related to what I sort of concluded with the postmortem. Similar in terms of a lazy thinking category, maybe, but that's about it. But yeah, in terms of the idea of like asking a clarifying question, because I do like I have I mean, on the one hand, like you're a direct, or you've like given a direct example about it, just there. Um, in terms of, I mean, this is sort of like, yeah, exactly what I should have said. Um, rather than stating something as fact, just asking, or even just like stating it as fact and then saying at the end, like, is that right? I think the question version is still better.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just habit, and that's why it's something that I don't think about and uh, seems either obvious in retrospect or like easy to think of in retrospect, is because I've just habitually done this. Um, it's interesting as well because like, I'm reinterpreting something and playing it back to you, but I've said it as a statement and I've hedged multiple times. Like, it feels like, um, and then like or sort of approximating that stuff. So I guess if you're hedging anything that's for the point of clarification, it's a good flag for whether you should like uh, ask it as a question instead, because you don't have to hedge when asking a question. It's actually shorter as well, the question version.
Yeah, slightly.
There's another
So,
habit as well. Oh,
go ahead.
sorry, just about fancy language, like um, this alternative that I put there, like to check I have this right, are you implying, as opposed to just are, like that's the only real word out of that I need. Well, I guess that there's no need to say that I'm trying to check for the point of clarity, otherwise I wouldn't be asking the question. Yeah.
I think it's reasonable to say that you're checking so someone knows the purpose and goal.
Mm.
Like, you don't need to, but I think it's a decent to include it. It's not just useless words.
Yeah. I can say just say for clarification, are you blah? Um, but I agree. It would just get tiresome if it was like, every second sentence had that in it. But I don't think you need to. It makes sense to do it once or twice early on, particularly if checking for clarification is not something that's common or not something that you think should be expected.
So you say you haven't had many discussions like that. Um, what are the differences?
Um, so focus. Just note them down as well. Um, so yeah, the focus of the um, like collectively, our focus was on a narrower set of things to talk about, which meant that it could happen more quickly as well. Um, I guess one of the reasons maybe that people go breadth first in asynchronous conversations, like on forums and stuff, is to minimize contact points, which is not necessarily a good idea. Um, the
Wait, what do you mean by minimize contact points? Wouldn't depth first minimize?
Oh, sorry, not in terms of the conversation, in terms of like you physically visiting the website. So the conversation touches on more points, but you make fewer posts.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Um,
a lot of what people do is designed around the assumption that someone was probably going to leave after a small number of back and forths. And so they pack more into each back and forth. And if you do shorter back and forth, people still tend to leave after a similar number of iterations, I think. Like they don't
yeah,
adjust properly. They're not like these were really quick and easy, therefore I'll
I can have
keep
20
going
more of
longer
them.
than normal.
Yeah, it's just once it gets to a depth of like 5 or 6, people don't usually continue.
Yeah, I think
Um,
if you do a bunch of quick and easy ones, I think their impression is they haven't learned any very much yet. Like they didn't get a bunch of interesting content. They want content front loaded in the early ones, that like sophisticated stuff to muse on, because that's what they're actually looking for. So
yep,
if you're
yep,
leaving it out, they're like, we've had 5 back and forths and nothing even happened. All that happened was we clarified some details. You didn't say any sophisticated, interesting theories.
yeah.
And they don't
Which is,
actually value clarifying what they mean.
well, I think one of the things that occurs to me, like sort of on the theme of like communication is hard. Um, I think people are told repeatedly that that's not really the case, and a lot of our typical experiences sort of reflect that. Uh, I don't think people know how to clarify stuff most of the time. They just, either say the thing louder or use different words in a way that doesn't actually add clarity to it.
Yeah, usually the clarifying questions are really bad too. They're just like, I don't understand this sentence, with no information about what you don't understand or what multiple meanings you're interpreting it as. Like people will say stuff is ambiguous, but name 0 interpretations, not 2 plus. So I think the problems are on both ends with clarifying.
One of the things about those sort of questions sometimes, like sometimes I'll say like I don't understand what you're talking about. Um, And so in situations like if it was in the middle of the conversation we were having and I didn't understand something, there's a lot of context around which I can say, like, do you mean this or something else? Um, whereas if like a lot of the time when someone says something, it just feels like a lot, particularly if it's like the first, like it's very early in a chain. Um, Often it's not really possible to like come up with like any detailed ideas about what they mean. Um, so like one thing that occurs to me was I think I posted in one of the subscribers channels a little while ago, something about um, uh, Subscribestar and Discord and messages and groups and stuff. Uh, and I'd just done it, so I had all the context in my head. It's to do with like my payment not going through, and then so the group dropping off Discord, and then me making the payment, and then the group coming back, and their Discord integration. And I said something about that, and you replied um, like that you had no idea what I was talking about. And I sort of realized that I'd left out a whole bunch of context that was in my head, but obviously, I hadn't included. Um, so I think
Yeah.
there's like cases like that where it makes a lot more sense, but definitely like multiple chains of just I don't know with no expansion on it is, well, it's a bit of a conversation killer. It's sort of, and it's doing a thing where you're putting a lot of burden on the other person. It's not simply like the other person starting out an idea, saying something fresh, and making sure that you're on the right page because they've used words that could mean, half a dozen different things, or refer to half a dozen different concepts. That's sort of like a bit more of an exception, as opposed to halfway through a conversation, those sort of things should already have been, uh, like the common ground should already be established such that there are multiple, provided it's coherent, multiple different interpretations that make sense. Um, yeah, so I guess it's a bit contextualist or dependent on context.
So, do you have ideas about how to manage your discussions better in the future? Do you have questions about that? Like how to
Y-
make them work out better, more like this one?
So I think I have ideas about how to participate in a discussion like this better. Um, I'm not sure I know how to like steer discussions so that they're more like this as opposed to more chaotic. Like if I had a worse conversation partner, um, I'm not sure that I would be able to effectively improve the quality of the conversation.
I think the biggest thing to do for that is to make the tree and keep it up to date as you go along and look at the tree before you respond to stuff and encourage the other person to take a look at it and think about what parts they think are important and which nodes they're responding to and so on. But especially to do it yourself.
Yeah, um, that makes sense. I think as well, like um, publishing it sort of thing, or like sharing it with the other person, uh, is probably a good way to sort of filter out, or to like the person gives you important like metadata about their conversation practices and things by how they respond to that. Um, if they refuse to look at it, it's probably not a conversation worth
Yeah.
proceeding with. Um, and if you can do that and then say, hey, I've like made this conversation tree here, but you can see here that like your last message has like 6 different branches coming off it. I think that's, potentially an issue. Is there one that you would like to talk about particularly first? If they're like, no, respond to me on everything, and it's like, well, that's a bit unreasonable. Yeah, that would be interesting. I should try that next time I have a conversation.
Yeah, I think people lose track of their own conversations and they don't actually know what's going on. And making a tree helps people understand what they're saying and how it fits together and keep track of it better. It's like a visualization of data that people have issues with.
So
No,
I'm just thinking, oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Um, so whether that sort of, so the way that, or the sort of rules of thumb I've developed about making these conversation trees, um, the parent-child stuff is fairly straightforward. The multiple children horizontal component, though, is an interesting one. And I wonder if that is something that like typically when we think about posts, you decide like how long the body of text is, and then typically you're expected to leave like one reply. Um, Sort of, like an exchange of letters back and forward. But where they're actually like graphing a conversation like this and essentially splitting paragraphs, um, for different horizontal nodes would be an effective way to actually have like a forum. Um, yeah, because then it would be really obvious, some of the mistakes people make, or they would be more obvious. Sorry.
Reddit is somewhat like this. It has nested tree structure, but it encouraged people to put all their sibling comments into one comment, usually.
That I think would be the biggest difference, and the thing that would actually make a lot of stuff obvious. The tree structure is nice for looking at like the graph of conversation because that very faithfully sort of represents the human notion of like responding to something. Um, but uh, but yeah, but like I think particularly because we've got this idea that you should reply once, or like that one reply is sort of good. Uh, we've conflated the idea of like a reply with what's shown as a message uh, in the thing.
Yeah, I don't know
Notifications
if
sort of make it a bit more
people
complex as well.
I don't know if people think that replying once is good. Like, I don't know if that's a conversational methodology opinion. I think it is a habit, a social practice, a custom that people do, which is different than actually like thinking it's rational. Which I don't know how many of them have actually thought about it in that way.
I think a big thing is the idea of like uh, notifications caused for the other person. Um, in that, if someone replies to one of my things just because they've said 10 sentences or 10 topics, I don't necessarily want, 10 things in my inbox. Um,
Yeah, that's
as
just a
such,
software issue.
yeah, but it's a software issue that's usually out of people's hands. Like Reddit decides that, right? Or like my Android phone decides that. Um,
Yeah, although I think in practice, getting notification spammed like barely matters.
yeah, I agree.
You
Um,
just you go to your
well,
inbox and then they all get marked red, and like who cares if there were 10 instead of one?
yeah. Also, the like better controls now in terms of silencing particular notifications and stuff. Um, even if there is, uh, it's like the conversations in FI recently, or with Lousy have. I mean, he's posting more like larger messages now, but yeah, there have been times where my Discord notifications have just been going off, every few seconds, and it's just easy to like mute the channel for an hour or two. Um, so that's sort of getting better. But yeah, but I agree, it's just a software issue. It's not a debate methodology or it's a discussion methodology issue
Yeah,
particularly.
about multi-replying though. People also don't self-reply, like reply to their own notes. That's uncommon. And I think these are both social status related. I think it's similar to double texting. I don't know if you're
Mm,
familiar with
that was the
how,
first thing that came to mind. Yeah.
yeah, double texting is low status. It seems too needy and try hard. Taking turns sort of makes the social tryhardness more symmetric. It makes the effort look more symmetric.
It's also like biased towards people of higher social status because they can then like choose not to reply, and it's the other person's fault if they reply, sort of thing. It's the lower status person's fault. They're not allowed to as such.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Oh, as in with double texting, like low status person messages high status person. The low status person wants to talk to them. There's a rule about saying that you can't text twice. So the high status
Oh,
person
you're
can
thinking spread out over time, so if they get ignored once, they don't get to try again later.
yeah. I've always thought it was really stupid with like a thing about double texting if you were doing it in quick succession, just because sometimes you write more than like that's convenient for one message bubble.
Yeah, it is a social rule though, even if the second message comes like 2 seconds later.
Mm. I've never been exposed to like that has never seemed to play a particularly big role in anything that I've been exposed to. Um, the idea of texting like hours later or things, or well, the other thing is if it's not just an extra thing you thought of, um, then usually like the content is long enough that it's sort of less unreasonable, and you're probably not sending really long messages to someone who's going to care that much about you double texting, I guess, in general, because of the effort required.
It's easy to not notice when people judge you. Like they usually don't tell you.
That's true.
So it's hard to get feedback on whether it is actually playing a role in your social circle.
Yep. There's also just like I don't know, I guess soft judgments that change your opinion about someone, or that someone's opinion changes over time, where it's not one event. Like they're not going to respond more negatively to you. It's not a big deal breaker or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's um, and so they might not even realize that they've sort of like updated
Oh
their
yeah, absolutely.
ideas.
Um, it's often a subtle thing, and they're not consciously thinking, "Oh, he double texted me. He seems needy." They just sort of have reactions and interpretations of the world and an impression of what's going on that sort of
Mm.
forms over time. But they're still not conscious of. Even their like total social evaluation of someone is usually kept largely out of words.
Yep. Yeah. I have noticed a little bit recently, uh, definitely more so than before, like how like there's sometimes a reasonable amount of like social commentary or social dynamics analysis sort of thing that not necessarily high quality, but that gets included in stuff sometimes. Um, like when people make a comment about like self-deprecation or something like that, um, and they're sort of like they're occasionally pretty honest. Um, there are sometimes rules about when you can say that, and it seems pretty universal that no one takes it seriously. Um, like they don't, take these criticisms and say, "Oh my gosh, this is a huge problem." It's sort of just accepted that in, certain contexts you can bring up some of this stuff. Um, I don't know, it's interesting. There's, I guess, the non-serious side of it is the part that is more interesting to me, in that people like knowing sort of quote unquote some of this stuff and not there's a big barrier to actually integrating it in a way that like there isn't for other ideas.
I think integration is a much bigger problem than people realize for lots and lots of ideas like science or economics or whatever, um, or like sports strategies. People often have a hard time remembering the strategy in the heat of the moment. So I
Yeah,
think actually using knowledge is an issue across domains that
yeah.
people underestimate.
So it reminds me, I mean, one thing that occurs to me is like theory of constraints and stuff, and the problems that have that's experienced, which feel like an integration problem. Um, but then also that, uh, like in particularly with stuff like in a sports game, um, there was one thing that I think psychology probably has gotten mostly right is an idea that, uh, well, I got exposed in first year psych, which is arousal stimulates the dominant response, and basically it's about like panicky type situations or situations where you're being watched. um, there's this idea of a dominant response, and if there's contention between two ideas, then you can freeze. Um, but it's used to explain, for example, why some people do like particularly well when they're performing. So like being on stage and playing this song the best that you've ever played it or whatever else. Um, and why other people get like overly anxious about stuff like that, like public speaking. And essentially, it just comes down to like practice in terms of um, when you're not consciously trying to steer your behavior, what's your default? Um, and it's one of those things that without like it's very easy to understand an idea intellectually, but I mean there's caveats on that, but to at least feel like you understand it intellectually, but then not be able to uh, use it intuitively or to apply it by default, and you still fall back on old methods. Um,
I think the
yeah,
number one driver of that is lack of intellectual understanding, lack of depth to their understanding, lack of being able to come up with examples, lack of being able to intentionally and correctly apply it to scenarios, like lack of being able to answer questions and counter arguments and explain why it makes sense and all of that. I think people just they think they understand things when they're missing so many of those things.
mm.
And then lack of practice is also an issue.
So in many ways, I would like I think like generating those examples or playing with the ideas in like hypotheticals and coming up with the questions and stuff um, is practice. It's sort of like practice of the idea, um, as opposed to like practice of the actions associated with the idea. And that distinction it's clearer for a sports game where you can drill a particular action, but you've got to have a different sort of practice for a tactic. Um, the distinction is big there, but it's smaller in stuff like applying theory of constraints to a manufacturing firm when you're a manager, because so much of your work is like tertiary stuff, paper based as opposed to action based. But yeah, but that makes a lot of sense. It's yeah, being able to fool yourself with how well you understand things because they probably can't put it into words, like people in that situation.
Yeah, a reasonable test is, could you write an essay on this? And not a mediocre essay, but like a particularly good one.
Yeah, which
And if
for
you're
something
not
like a
there yet, your intellectual understanding's not all the way there.
book like Theory of Constraints, I mean, it's a novel, so the word count is inflated a bit for that, but writing like a 3,000 word essay on like the mechanisms and how to implement like Theory of Constraints or how it works, it should be pretty achievable. Like the book, I imagine, is 70,000 words or something. I'm not
More.
sure exactly, but yeah, more.
Yeah.
Oh, is that the book Theory of Constraints or the book The Goal? I was thinking of The Goal.
Yeah, the goal. The goal is more than that.
Oh, it's very hard to go search for, or rather without like gold in the thing. Okay.
115. Yeah, that's more like it. "300 words per minute is not the average reader."
Um, comes out really close though. Like if you said 115, this estimate with 6 hours 22 minutes is 114 600.
But no, I
But yeah.
read that estimate and then said that seems like the right ballpark.
Oh, okay. Oh, is in this one as opposed to. I wasn't
As
sure if you
opposed
had
to 70.
like a notepad thing up and like
No,
control
no,
rate.
no. I just saw 115 and I'm like, that seems about right. That's what I expected,
Oh,
roughly.
I I didn't even see that like down here there's a word count estimate. I just looked at that and was like, oh, I can figure that out.
Oh. Oh, okay. Yeah. I just saw the
Um,
number and I'm like, yeah, it's not 70.
that feels about right though. Um,
Some of his other novels are shorter. That's part of how I knew.
wondering what the Oh yeah, here we go. All right, so 300 words a minute. I think maybe the reason this like well they say the average reader, um though one thing like the average reader reading at a speed of 300 words a minute would take blah. Pretty much every reader reading at this speed would take that. Um, it's sort of funny in that the average reader is average is a modifier that's entirely unnecessary. Just a reader
I think
reading at the speed.
average is meant to suggest that 300 words per minute is average.
Yes, yeah. Grammatically it doesn't like link, but yeah, but I think I get the impression for that as well. Um, I mean this 200 to 250 sounds more reasonable.
Yeah.
It's
That's
definitely I
that's
noticed.
not 2 minutes per page though. 2 minutes per page is slower than that because a typical page is more like 320 words.
Oh,
It's
this is a
absolutely
A4
not
page.
500. That's completely wrong.
I think it's an A4 page. They say 1 inch
Oh,
margins. So
are they
yeah,
talking about printer paper?
yeah.
Okay, printer
Or yeah,
paper, 500 words. That makes sense. That's
well,
bigger than
illegal.
a book.
Um, it's not going to be that much difference between US and elsewhere, but um, yeah, A4 is. Does the term A4 like mean much to people in the US?
I'm not sure. I don't know much about printer paper names. I haven't paid attention.
Okay, it's really common in Australia. Like if you say an A4 page, it's like in kindergarten grade 1 type thing. Um,
What I've heard is 8.5 by 11. I remember those particular dimensions. I think
That
that's
might be.
standard.
Uh, that might be legal letters and not A4. Yeah, okay. A4. Oh, it's not A4, but uh, yeah, A4 is like 8.3 by
I
11.7.
see. So it's just fractionally different, pretty close.
Yeah, no. A4 has some nice properties, like geometric properties, in terms of. So it's sort of one of the ways it's derived is that if you halve an A4 page perpendicular to its length, you get an A5 page, and that continues through like A0 down. Um, and there's a ratio between the sides based on the square root of 2, um, which
Ah.
makes some neat properties. Not that that really comes into play for anything more than, occasionally doing some origami at home or something.
Yeah, so
Or
back to how to make a conversation work.
yeah,
Next suggestion is short chunks. And one of the ways to do short chunks is two at a time, your thing and their thing. That's a pretty simple method that I've found people will often agree to. It's easy to understand right away. It seems fair. People seem reasonably willing to do it.
one thing that I've noticed, just thinking about all this sort of stuff, I don't think we've talked about it, but I've talked about it with a few Flux people. So there's this presumption because of the goal of Flux to introduce a new like issue-based system. Uh, there's this presumption that we would somehow be play a role in like drafting legislation, like actually writing it and like having forums for people to discuss it and stuff like that. Um, I've always been against this because because of basically I realize the epistemic role that like choices around that sort of stuff, technical choices around that sort of stuff can play on the other thing, and why would we restrict people to a particular thing as opposed to just letting them already do it because evidently they've already got methods for that. Um, but everyone that has suggested it, I don't think has put as much time thinking, just any thinking about how this sort of conversation and structure stuff works as we've spent like explicitly talking about it. Um, and it's become much more obvious to me, this sort of disparity, um, over the past few months. I don't really know how to raise it with people, but because you come off as arrogant. But yeah, interesting thing that I noted.
Yeah, I find people generally pretty hostile to discussing discussion methodology. Even communities that ought to care, like Less Wrong or CR people. Like CR says we learn by critical discussion, but then none of them seem to have actually paid that much attention to how do we organize a discussion and make it effective, and they don't seem to want to.
Yeah, that really surprises me. I think I was thinking about this today about why, like, the issue of people having a bad time the first time they come to FI. Um, and I feel like more and more it's linked to their, like, the presupposition that they're sort of done with any education they need about how to have a discussion. Like, don't tell me that I'm bad at having discussions. I've been having them all my life. That sort of idea. Um,
Yeah, that's a noticeable problem recently, but it can't be the problem because we didn't used to do that, and people still had a bad time. Like there
yeah,
are
okay.
plenty of past discussions with much less meta where people had other problems, like that they have trouble dealing with criticism.
Yeah. Well, this is I guess a special case of uh yeah, the negative reaction to criticism in general. Um,
Right, and then there's
yeah.
other stuff just like there are social norm expectations that they don't want to
Yeah.
like express. They just want it to be followed without them having to ask.
Yeah. Um, I'm just gonna take a quick break and fill up my drink and stuff. I'll be back in a sec. Okay, back.
Part of what happens in discussions is people want to win some. If they just consistently lose, they get upset or quit. Actually, I think I read somewhere that that's an animal thing. Like when puppies mock fight, if the stronger puppy wins 100% of the time, the weaker one stops playing.
Yeah. Well, it sort of makes sense. In that it like there's a lot of it's like, for example, if you like if we practiced like a game, so say chess. If we were practicing chess, you're gonna beat me basically 100% of the time. Um, in that situation, I might learn a lot about openers, but I learn almost nothing about the end game besides via things you do because I never get to it. Um, I can sort of see something like that in there. Like it's less useful to practice if you don't practice parts of everything, um, including winning. Like I think one of the reason kids can be like horrible to each other or um, like bad sports people and stuff is if you never practice winning uh, and you don't know how to deal with it, then you can like do harm or be mean or things without really realizing it. But it's one of those things where some people, might take more than one occurrence of that to really get to know uh, like what they prefer doing themselves. Um, they don't build up that skill. Yeah, it's not really puppy related, but yeah. Then again, maybe it's just preference. It's nice to win, sort of thing, as in it feels better. Some
Yeah,
situations aren't like
I
that though.
don't I don't have that intuition, and I was fine with losing consistently for years with DD.
I think this is a like that's not a default place people are at. Um, and particularly as well when people come to and even if people like if there was the say the BOI list in 2012 and they came there after reading Beginning of Infinity, I don't think they'd be okay losing with DD even though he's the reason that they went there. Um, even though they acknowledge that he's like has far more expertise on all of this stuff, they would still want to be acknowledged as like being able to valuably contribute or something like that. Um,
Yeah, people's respect for authority is a lot stronger when the authority is at a distance. When the authority seems like a neighbor, a friend, a part of their social circle that they're directly interacting with, and they're not just like um really scared and like meeting the boss and on their best behavior, if it becomes like normalized and like a regular thing, then they stop having all the respect and stuff.
Yeah. I think it's like there's an unstated sort of quid pro quo type arrangement where the authority is like able to be tolerated provided there's a bit of like lip service type stuff, like something like that. Like, at the very least they want to be congratulated for trying, even if their idea is crap. Um, the Gavin
Yes.
impasse, I've looked a little bit at that.
Oh, yeah, that's just a topic
But
idea,
yep,
potentially.
yep, no, sorry. Um, we'll get to it.
Um, yeah, so one of the things with FI is, like, suppose I acknowledge that people want to win 20% of the time. That doesn't give me any way to let them win. Like,
Hmm.
I can't just be like, oh, you're right, socialism, you got me this time.
It's different from something like chess, where like you can subtly throw a game of chess in a way that doesn't really make you a worse player. I mean, one way would just be to make one very bad move and then play normally the rest of the time. Um,
Oh yeah, there's solutions to that. Like you can just play without your one of your rooks when you start the game.
oh yeah, yeah, other handicaps, but you can't. Yeah, with philosophy, w- you know, what would that
Also,
look like?
yeah, and changing sides in the middle of a chess game is a thing. Like you get a winning
Oh yeah,
position and then you just trade, and then you try to get a winning position from the losing position.
that's a neat idea. Um,
Yeah, if the
there's
gap is big enough, you could give someone like 3 swaps per game.
Yeah, wow. Well, I guess you could do it on like scoring or something, so that if like a differential occurs of X amount, that triggers a swap.
It
Um,
requires some like good
Gameable.
faith though, because like the proper strategy is just like lose on purpose and get it really, really bad, so it's unrecoverable, and then swap like one move before checkmate.
Yeah, I guess in terms of proper strategy with a game like that, like the goal of the game is not to find who's the better chess player. Like with a game like
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah,
presumably you already know that going in.
yeah.
Um,
It requires some good faith. The person that you like, they try to win, and then when it doesn't work out, they swap. Anyways, yeah, letting people win at FI is really hard and problematic. It's often hard to give them very much, like even good try, because often it's not a very good try. Like sometimes it's the type of try that I think if they keep doing that, they will have a bad life and it will never work. So if you praise that, it's like wrong and misleading. Like the most I can give is like it's good to reveal that error. It's a very important one to get fixed. Like it's better that we now have information about it than that it was hidden.
so one thing that occurs to me is like a defining sort of feature of the difference between like me and FI now and a few years ago is that I didn't even if I acknowledged that other people knew more about me than things, there was not a uh, it's still like I was still in like this peer mindset. Um, I think people naturally are much more okay with not winning all the time if they uh, like if there's a student teacher type expectation. If one person like voluntarily sort of takes I mean, subservient is maybe the wrong word. Um, but yeah, like that, the student position, then it's not nearly as much of an issue because the win condition changes. It's not about changing someone's mind or something. Maybe it's about changing your own mind. Um, but yeah, one thing that does occur to me is like the idea of feeling. This is not in a teacher-student thing, just in general. Um, so sometimes people manipulate each other by doing this by making someone else think that an idea is theirs instead of it being the first person's. I'm not really sure how much that happens, but it's comes up in like political dramas or whatever. Um, the only thing that comes to mind is the idea of like the eureka moments type thing or moments of realization often feel like winning in a sense. Um, that would be the only thing that I can really think of as like a way that someone who's not very good at FI could like win. Oh, and excluding the student teacher sort of mindset. Um, Like if you presume that you have a lot to learn, then people are generally a lot better about that sort of stuff. Um, it's because they don't see themselves as equal that they've got that sort of opportunity.
It's hard to get people to do that. They're quite hostile to it. They like want to be equal or peers or whatever, not give up social status and like admit that they're a newbie or whatever. They find something threatening about like being bad at thinking and reading and logic and so on. That's different than like going to a pottery class and on your first day being like, I'm bad at pottery, I don't know what I'm doing.
One thing that does occur to me is, so in the first month or so, um, I sort of like I felt like I came up a lot against a lot of like my own blockers, sort of things, like ideas that I had about myself that were wrong, is an approximation. Um, there's so one of the situations that you see this sort of thing in the real world, and there's a lot of like culty bad stuff about Alcoholics Anonymous, but there's and in general cults do this. Um, there's a period of like breaking down or destroying like the ideas you have about yourself or the barriers that you've got up mentally or things like that. There's this
Yeah,
period
yeah,
of
like
like
boot camp.
coming to accept yourself again or whatever. And I don't know of situations in like stuff that society considers healthy that really show that off. Um, I mean, I guess society considers Alcoholics Anonymous healthy because
Military boot
the
camp
alternative. But
is considered
oh yeah, yeah.
okay. Like it, and it's not just physical. They sort of teach people to actually follow orders and like learn military discipline.
Mm. I some of that seems not so good to me. I mean, I guess like military stuff is obviously a pretty special case. It's not
Yeah,
like
I mean it's not perfect, but it's socially accepted. That's why I brought it up.
yes, yeah, yeah. Um, or even softer culty stuff is socially accepted. Like anything that's normally like considered normal in a religious sense can still be really weird or culty, but is accepted at least. Maybe because of like only because of its religious connotation and sort of a hands-off approach to other people's beliefs. Um, Though I don't know why beliefs and practice should necessarily have anything to do with each other. But yeah.
Okay, so going back to letting people run at FI, even if you try to give them credit for revealing errors, they often like are denying the error that they just revealed. So it's hard to give them even that credit.
What's an example of like when they accidentally revealed an error, or
Yeah, like they make a mistake and then I point out the mistake and then I say, "Good job like having enough discussion to find out what one of your mistakes is." And they're like, "Oh, I'm not convinced I made a mistake." I can't even give them that kind of credit a lot of the
hmm.
time. They'll just try to
So
debate me about whether they made a mistake and never admit to any of the mistakes in the debate. They just keep going and thinking they're right about everything.
yeah, this is a really bad common social thing in terms of uh like actually reminds me of something someone said to me when I was in, I don't know, grade 8 or whatever, which is like people put a lot more work into not doing work than it would actually take to do the thing in the first place. And similarly, people put like a lot of effort into like defending against having made a mistake, or maybe the implications of that mistake, like that it should somehow be ignored or passed over or something instead of taken seriously. Um, I mean, finding an error in yourself by discussing feels like an odd thing to congratulate people about. Them find it like
Well,
accepting the error
yeah.
is,
I mean,
yeah,
but
sounds better.
it's about all there is in a lot of discussions. Like often they're not really doing anything right. That doesn't sound condescending to say. Like you wrote some English sentences. Some of them were complete sentences. That's condescending.
Yeah. Um,
But people often do worse than that. So like that,
yeah.
it should be real praise if someone can do that. Like it's something. You got to start where you are and build on it. But people don't want to start there.
No, yeah. I mean, one thing that maybe I'm not sure how it would be used, um, but similar to sort of uh, like your debate policy is for people arbitrarily, but in terms of something sort of similar in some ways that applies more generally for FI, like the you, uh, like most people, um, the supermajority will, like, without having a track record that they could point to about stuff like identifying their own mistakes or fixing or things like that. Like even like the learning report stuff is one way that someone could develop that, at least in part. Without them having that sort of thing, uh, like it's not just that they won't convince anyone else that they're already good enough to have like a high quality discussion on a complex topic, um, but like that shouldn't be enough to convince, or that should be enough to convince themselves that they can't do that generally. Um, Maybe can't do it at all. And I think that's a really big difference. People don't see that lack of a track record as an issue. Um, yeah.
People are hostile to the track record thing when I bring it up, but they absolutely bring it up against me, on their own initiative, even when I haven't mentioned it in that conversation. It's a fairly common thing. They don't
How
bring it up
would it?
in the identical way, but they'll say, like, when was the last time you conceded a conversation? Like, where's an example of you admitting you were wrong?
Yeah. Um, so I've sometimes wondered that, but I don't think it's relevant. Um, I mean, also, I know that there are archives and stuff that I can go look through where I imagine that
Yeah.
I can find that. Um,
People are often very unsatisfied with either small examples that seem sort of like minor, or with the answer, can you point out one case where I should have changed my mind but did not? Like, where was the missed opportunity? I don't
mm,
have a lot of opportunities. I admit that. Like, I think other people are bad at discussion and don't give me many opportunities. Not my fault.
yeah.
And I mean, it's partly because I took a lot of those opportunities in the past in discussions that happened a long time ago.
Well, and that's one of the things as well. Like if someone's saying like you should have recent examples of this, but also like criticizing you on the like quality of your ideas or something, the higher quality your ideas, the less recent examples you should have. Um,
Yeah.
it's yeah. Anyway, stuff like that. I don't think people
People do
really.
not people don't have an intuitive expectation of rationality with reach. They expect people's being good at stuff to be fragile and like domain specific. Like even if you're good at a bunch of stuff and knowledgeable, you'll just be like trash at some other stuff and get it wrong. Whereas if you actually have generic thinking skills, then being good at a few things, you should actually be getting lots of stuff right, like across fields.
Hmm,
And also you can, as a thinking skill, know when you don't know, like know which fields to be not make claims in that are wrong. Like, I don't make a
yes.
bunch of architecture claims, so my ignorance of architecture doesn't cause me to get a lot of. I don't actually debate architecture things and think I'm right when I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah. One thing that occurs to me as I don't have a good way to sort of explain it, but um, but I have like an inverse example type thing is so this is just like a projection of hyperbolic space, and there's some interesting things about it. Um, but in terms of if you imagine like people's expectation, the incorrect expectation of like conversation being fragile, like always in all subjects, sort of thing, and maybe one person can be good in an area but it doesn't have reach. Um, so if you imagine that sort of like a a tiled floor or something like that, that's sort of the image I got of like a uniform fragile sort of situation. But as you get knowledge, you like this, the tiles get bigger and bigger and bigger as you go in the direction of knowledge, sort of in the opposite way to the way that this happens, and it reaches this limit around the edge. Um, and that's sort of like universally true. If you say if like I imagine like the difference between you and I, then compared to like you and magic alien that was sort of that much better again, there would be lots of things that they might be able to like show you that you're wrong about. Um, but it's just that there's nothing that we know of that is in that position. Um, like those. it does continue, but it continues in like a geometric, like exponential repeating sort of system, not a linear one. And that's sort of the reach, I guess, coming in.
Yeah, people are inclined to just assume that I'm arrogant and filter me out without any examples of actual errors that are like clearly established. Like they just sort of see something they think is an error and then um don't have processes where if they're wrong they actually find out.
Yeah,
Okay, so a few
I think
things.
that's.
Go ahead.
Yep, go on.
Okay, one was about smart people and fragility. There's a very common like view of smart people in our culture that they're very frequently like bad at social skills or street smarts or something like the people in the Big Bang Theory. And you see
Mm,
it just throughout movies. The smart people are never sort of just good at everything and they're always like good at some nerdy things and then terrible about some other stuff that the normal people do. Like they're very frequently bad at sports
yeah.
and
I think
but
one of the
being
reasons for that
smart
is
is
them
not
being.
a disadvantage at like any of these things.
Mm, um, read the sports thing. I think that there's actually like a lot of punishment for smart people who, like, or people, considered smart in this way, who try. Like, the only way for them to not be punished is, or they manage the punishment by like by optimizing a minimum, which, if there's something compulsory, is like doing a little bit and not much. Um, because then the teachers don't punish them, but the kids who are good at sport don't punish them either. But if they do attempt to like join or practice or stuff like that, they're forced to do it in private, um, because they're punished socially if they do it publicly. And then so the only way that they can win at the social side of this game is to like get amazingly good with no one knowing, and then just like be amazing. Um, yeah, otherwise it's like it's a very like disingenuous and mean sort of culture.
It's also possible to not fall behind in the first place.
Mm. With sports, actually, that's like, excluding uh being really exceptional at something for physical reasons, or like where you're training like 3 hours a day. Pretty much everyone, like, no, there's no sport where it really takes that much effort to catch up to like good people that you would find in a day-to-day sort of situation. um Once you get to higher and higher levels of competition, sure, but for the situation where most, like, these smart people, um like not being good at sports, like those situations, it's like a few weekends could really, really improve their game. Not much.
Yeah, especially at younger ages where there's often less of a fitness gap.
Mm. I guess fitness is the big long term thing that they need to work on, maybe. But there's some stuff um, like American football is obviously has some pretty dominant physical sort of traits, but for something like tennis or whatever, it's it's pretty quick to catch up.
Okay, so about the asymmetries, there's a few issues with why people are hostile to asymmetric discussion rules. One is that they have an intuition that rationality is symmetric, rationality doesn't take sides, especially not based on what they view as like a social status thing of this person is regarded as higher skill. Like it should be possible for anyone to debate anyone. This is sort of a standard view. And I think it's correct as far as it goes. The reason that an asymmetry is important is not an epistemology reason, it is their own social attitudes and flaws. It's a cultural
Yep.
reason. And so telling them that, like, if you were rational enough, we could have a symmetric discussion. But because of you have a bunch of standard cultural flaws, we can't. That makes it worse. That's offensive.
Mm. I notice this even in situations where, like, quite often just asking someone, like, are you upset and what do you actually like want? What's the actual point? Um, doesn't even result in them giving you any answers. Um, like the social stuff is a s- I don't like I don't think people realize how much of an issue it is and how much it like diminishes the quality of conversation and communication. Um, I guess they've never really experienced anything else, so why would they believe that it does make like getting rid of it makes conversation better? Um,
Okay, a couple other things about making good conversations. One is you can have discussion and not put it all into the tree. Like you can have sort of comments or side discussion. Like you can just talk back and forth a bit to like think out loud, and then you can specify which things you're like, this is my actual point. I want this in the tree. So you can have like a bunch of low stakes comments that don't have to be replied to, and then if you actually want to reply, you say, okay, this one goes in the tree. Like you could explicitly label all the ones that should go in the tree, and then still have like small clarifying questions and other stuff that never goes in the tree. And that would keep the tree smaller and more manageable and lower the stakes of a lot of small interactions.
yeah, I can see that as in people feeling like not saying something, for example, because they don't want it in the tree, as opposed to like it does make sense, especially for a sizable conversation. And in fact, you would like anyone making a tree would probably, I imagine, get to the point where they, like in an ongoing discussion, where like copying in every message is unfeasible, and they'd need to like distill points out anyway. Um, and like clarifying questions might be on there until they can be wrapped up into either existing nodes or whatever else. But there's no point keeping them on there. They're just noise after some point. Um, unless you're interested in like a low level analysis. Uh, but yeah, that sort of makes sense. I think that lines up generally with maybe an idea of like saying like this is my main point, and then here's some exposition about that point, maybe analogy stuff or whatever, um, and like passing comments on the side to sort of like either anticipate like esoteric viewpoints or uncommon viewpoints or like thoughts about interactions with particular other like e.g. epistemologies or something. So like, if you explain something about the way that ideas work, and then, you might have an aside like, for like inductivists will often say like this sort of thing, and this is the response. And it's not, in the core idea. Um, yeah, no, that makes sense. I think
Yeah,
I'm not
so
sure
you
it would,
can't.
oh yeah,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I'm not sure if it would like be that, I'm not, I mean, conversation trees in general aren't that much of an issue, so, or aren't really used. So, I can imagine like people not putting stuff in a conversation might not happen um, that much, like for the sake of a discussion tree. But in certain circumstances it might happen, yeah, and it makes sense over the long term.
Yeah, so you can have an everything tree, and there are advantages. You can also have like a main point tree. You can label this is the thing I think is advancing the discussion. Then you have these other things that you don't necessarily have to reply to, and they're not that big a deal, and I'm not sure about them, and whatever. And so you can have a layer of separation there. The other
Yeah,
thing, go ahead.
oh yeah, the other thing that occurred to me here was so I think I was looking around for discussion story, or you might have linked this as well as an example. Um, but like if you have a tree like this, then it can be for ideas that are much bigger than the conversation generally. Like there's, your everything tree, there's a points in a conversation tree, and then there's like a school of thought tree type thing. And so you can obviously update the school of thought tree as conversations progress, but you can also like provide that. And if someone's talking to you, then you can say like, this is all the stuff I understand uh, before this, or the other context for this sort of idea that I understand that, people of your persuasion think, or something like that. And then they can either update you on that as well if they disagree, or uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
you can also have multiple trees at once on different levels of detail if you want to.
yeah, yeah,
Depends how much work you want to put in. So another thing for having conversations is focusing on some points and going into depth on something and trying to get it actually resolved. I think is helpful. Like you can start with a bit of breadth, like what are a few of the issues, and then you can pick one and then try to resolve it. So that because if you just keep going breadth first over and over, you're gonna have like so much stuff with nothing resolved. So going down down the tree in a particular spot, I think is pretty important and keeps the stuff more manageable. Like if you sort of do one branch at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I definitely agree. And this is starting to make it like a lot more obvious. I mean, this section's a bit inflated, uh, but yeah, the like breadth is not something that people consider as like a downside to a conversation, I think mostly. But yeah. It also makes me think that like a metric, I mean, it's hard to sort of do a metric around anything like this, but like the number of resolutions that have happened, um, like you're never going to completely agree with someone on everything. And so even before you get into the meat of whatever topic you should have, there should already have been resolutions to establish common ground and inferential distance and stuff. Um, I wonder if that's actually like a step that often just gets ignored in conversations. Uh, like if you think about like conversation phases,
Yeah, people
um,
are generally pretty hostile to treating a conversation as a project and doing planning and considering prerequisites, resources, schedule, etc. They just want to jump into the meat of it as fast as possible and try to extract some partial value. And then they expect
hmm,
it to sort of fail and fade off. And like they don't expect conversations to actually work in the long term.
yeah,
This is part of their
that's
chronic overreaching, where they're used to like having lots of unsolved problems. This is part of why people don't like criticism, is they already know plenty of problems. They don't need like to know about more of their flaws, because they already have a queue of flaws to deal with that's too large and not really going down much. They need to actually be able to deal with flaws before criticism would seem valuable to them and get their queue low. And then adding things to the queue would seem useful.
yeah,
But they won't admit that. They won't admit that their queue's full, that they're having trouble resolving errors, that they know of a bunch of errors they already have. Like, they won't be like, I know I have all these flaws, could I get help with this one? You know, they sort of act like they have it all together and they have these great ideas and they want to debate you, but then they don't like criticism because they're just already overwhelmed with problems.
yeah. Um, this strikes me as like, yeah, it's a so occasionally I'll hear people talk about stuff like this, when so a common thing people comment on this sort of stuff with is like public speaking, where people will say, "Oh, you say like too much," or "You need to speak slower," or things like that. And the response back is often, "Yeah, I know, thanks. I'm working on it." Sort of thing. Like it's not appreciated because they're already aware of this, partially because other people have told them, partially because there's some
Yeah.
sort of obviousness to it. Um, but it's not that like they're not, the response is not, uh, "Oh yeah, so been trying to work on it, but I'm not making that much progress. Do you have other ideas?" Which I think would shut up most people who say that to you, because their main response is probably, "Have you tried not saying like?" And it's like, well, yeah, like I have tried that, but it's uh, so like a
Yeah, a lot
sarcastic
of
response,
people
I
would see
imagine, would.
that as weakness and look down on it because they've never tried it and don't realize that it's actually a bit hard.
Hmm.
Like the people who have no experience trying to do it don't appreciate the difficulty, so if you admit to having difficulty with it, they think you're bad. Which is really unfair, but it's common.
Yep. Well, this goes into least effort stuff as well. Um,
Which is why sometimes people retort things like, if you think you can do a better job, you get on stage.
yeah,
Which is like, it's partly mean, but it's partly actually relevant that the person who's criticizing doesn't know what it's like and doesn't know what dealing with problems is like and doesn't know how to do it and doesn't know what they're talking about.
yeah. Well, I guess the question, what has worked for you, is I don't know if that would come off as low status or not. Um, because
Yeah,
in some
a
ways
lot
it
of
could.
people's response is like, well, I'm not the public speaker. Like, they don't have something that worked for them, so they're gonna not take that very well.
Um, yeah, I'm not sure I really care about how well they take it. Um, But in terms of the conversation, it would like you'd either get either either get some new ideas maybe, or at least hear old ideas and
Yeah,
have an
I think
opportunity
it
to,
is a reasonable thing to try
or
to
they'll go
say
away.
to someone like, do you have something that worked for you?
Yeah. Um, it also has this expectation that if you're going to comment on a problem, you should probably understand it before just pointing out something. Um, it's like I'll occasionally get criticized for stuff to
Yeah.
do with flux,
The
and it's
FI criticism stuff is awkward because people say that they want criticism and then don't like it. They say that they're in a position to receive criticism and use it and learn from it if it was actually good. Like they claim to be ready for it when they're not.
mm,
So it runs into the very common problem of people wanting things. They want to be treated certain ways without admitting it. They want to say they want one thing and then be treated in a different way that's the way they really want, so that they can lie to the public. It's creating like a false story. Like they say they want criticism, and then you don't criticize them. And then they're like, see, I went to a critical forum and I was successful, and I dealt with all the criticism I got. I'm so smart. And they want you to help them create that show.
which I mean, funnily enough, is yeah. In that case, it would neither be going to a like a critical forum, nor answering criticism. The entire thing is uh, implicative to a story of dishonesty.
That's what a lot of human interaction is like, though, is both people try to make the other person look good. It's mutually expected.
Hmm.
Like, a lot of the purpose of interacting with people, they won't quite admit this, but it's to mutually help each other gain social status.
Yeah. One thing that occurs to me that I'm not sure how effective it might be, or even like what the population would be, but thinking about like the the problem or problems with like new people in FI, um, they're the people who are like in that set are at least recently, not years ago, sort of thing, um, when people who were in left, but uh, the audience who self-selects and actually like comes along is the audience who will have a problem with stuff like thinking that they're already done with all of their learning about how to have a conversation and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
whereas I don't know if there have been many people who have come along and like looking to learn like from uh I don't know, say like a 14-year-old was at school and they were like, I want to learn about all this stuff, but school is pretty crap. And so I looked around for places and I found you guys. Like, what would their experience be like by comparison? Um, and then the next sort of place that leads is like, what does it look like if like someone goes and tries to find people like that? Is there an easy way, or other things as well might be a problem?
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of recruiting of that type. You're welcome to give it a try.
I'm not sure where I would go. I have tried to like there are well, there's at least one younger person that I've who's
Uh,
like under 18 still.
yeah, I mean, I think all the
He's
kids
not.
are on TikTok, so you could make some
I don't know.
TikTok
I mean,
videos to recruit them.
um, I would have to become acquainted. I think I've seen. Well, I've seen comparably like it's comparable the number of people I've seen in real life using TikTok as to the number of TikTok videos I've watched. So yeah.
There are tons of kids on YouTube though, so if you put
Hmm.
stuff on YouTube that's targeted a certain way, it could work.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think I need to do work and actually figure out whether it's working or not. Because crap stuff on YouTube generally doesn't do well. So there has to be some kind of like overlap or something, or if you want to use people who aren't actually the target to spread the video more, then it's got to like pander to them in some way or something. I don't know. It's a hard thing to do.
Okay, so let's take a look at this discussion. I linked it in Discord. I'm curious how you react. to it and what happened. I sort of don't want to give you spoilers. I mean, and
Yep, no,
more
that's
get
cool.
your opinion.
So I'll see if I can figure out what I've read first, by the way. Um,
Yeah. So
so
there's a lot of context, but I think it's reasonably readable just starting at this one that says impasse in the title.
okay. Um, so I'm not going to worry about the previous context, understanding it. I've got a really, really
Yeah.
rough idea.
I mean, I give a bit of a summary in this comment. Like, it's meant to be semi standalone.
Okay, yeah. So we got statement of impasse and some, yeah, summary of things.
Yeah, before you go on, have you ever written something similar to this, do you think? Or seen them
Uh,
elsewhere?
um, in terms of something as explicit as this, I'm not sure if I've seen other examples uh from you in places. I don't think you wrote
Yeah.
anything like this
Elsewhere, I
that I
meant
saw in
non
like
FI.
2017. In terms of not FI, so the only comparable things are usually mean, and looking, they're not formulated in such a way that someone could like respond to them individually and change the person's mind, or respond to them individually by actually like fixing the issues incrementally or something like that. Um, it's usually stuff like, you know, the final message before a ban or something. Is I guess the only time I've really seen something that's particularly similar. Um, it's not conversation type stuff though. It's not like uh, you know, to do with like a way forward and things making sense to each party. It's usually just, yeah, a statement of condemnation sort of thing. So this is an interesting. Uh, so instead of saying like, why do you think I'm using these incorrectly? Um, it's sort of like it's a suggestion for something you could do, which is an odd thing.
Yeah,
Um,
the only reason I said this is I was giving a direct answer. Like, he asked or brought it up. Yeah, do you object to is a and has a relationship? Like, he literally asked if I object to the type of relationship itself, and he seemed to think that I was unfamiliar with it, and he was trying to tell me it exists and like tell me about
okay,
it
yeah,
as if I was just a newbie.
like component versus whole type stuff, basically. Like it's
Yeah, but like,
set
I
member
mean,
versus
I
set
think he might.
equivalent.
There's context. It might have been more specific. Like in Rails and other ORMs, there's is a and has a type stuff like with the database.
Oh
You
yeah, that
know,
makes sense.
you have like has many from
Yeah,
whatever. It might have been stuff like that, but I'm familiar with that. And he was sort of implying that I'm a newbie, and like it was sort of hard to ignore by how hard he was suggesting that I did not know this stuff, like putting words in my mouth to some extent.
and spending multiple sentences. Um, in software, the is a and has a relationships can be used quite often, and they're
Right.
valuable. Great.
It's sort of like if someone was trying to teach me that 2 + 2 = 4. For a while, I might throw in a sentence that says I do already know arithmetic.
Yeah.
Now moving on.
So I mean, yeah. There's again, uh, if it was like, how would you do it? That will help me. Like, would be a thing that would be more useful than just like, can you do? Um,
Yeah, this one I found weird. Like, what's wrong with an image? Like, the answer is no. There's no support for non-image trees built into these comments. That's not a feature.
Yeah, no,
That's
I
not a
mean
standard feature at all.
the you'd have to use like physical characters to indent them or something or other. I'm not sure if there's because I don't think the code blocks are not supported here from memory.
He was trying to do this, but like this has two root nodes. Like, there's two top levels.
Oh yeah,
So it was very weird.
they're they're the same thing, but is I don't.
This is 1 minus 2, and this is 3 minus 2.
Oh
The
no, the
numbers
two
are
root
different.
nodes are the like 1 minus 2
The
plus
root
3
nodes are the same. They both end up at 2. He was trying to do it two different ways or something.
is in like order of operation stuff, as in like grouping. Yeah, okay. So it looks like yeah, the grouping is different. Um, the I mean, but one minus 2 equals minus 1 is not is not a subnode. It's not a child of the top one. Um,
Yeah, no, it's not a tree. This is how you work it out like line by line. Except he also managed to get things wrong, if I remember.
yeah. I mean, one way with did he talk about indentation? I mean, the thing that occurs to me as a way to do a tree in the comment section in text only is just S expressions.
Oh, he got stuff wrong previously. He literally got 4. That's what it was. It was his previous one that mathed wrong.
Um,
He
yeah, no,
decided
I
for
don't.
some reason that the 1 was negative and the 2 was positive, or something.
He's like flipped the. Oh, yeah, something like I can geometrically, well, in terms of the characters, I can rearrange them to make sense of it, but it's just it's not maintaining any meaning. It's just using the same set of characters. Um,
Yeah, I don't know. This is the kind of like level of error I was dealing with.
yeah, that's somewhat problematic. Yeah.
And this is a reply to a request for a tree. Like, this is the tab one was his second draft of a tree.
So I will like the one sort of concession I feel like we could make towards him is or for him is like without examples, sometimes it can be tricky to figure out like what someone wants. In this case, the trees aren't trees, so I sort of
Yeah, do you mean examples like this one? Here's a tree in the thread. Wait, this is
yeah
made by Gavin. Right, we'd already been talking about trees. He'd already made a tree in an app. See, I will you use idea trees? Link to idea tree stuff. And then based on reading that, he managed to make this one before the math stuff. Which is why I took him as being like not trying.
you mean not trying with the math stuff?
Yeah, because he'd already
Yeah,
made this one, but now he can't make a tree in an app for the math.
which I mean this is like
And
reasonably
he posted an
detailed by the looks
image.
like.
Yeah,
It's like why wouldn't you just even if you just screenshot like go to Notepad, type your tree in there if you want, screenshot it, link that. That would be like anyway, yeah. Um, but no, fair enough. Okay, so
he has his own
um,
domain name where he uploaded this image. It's in the images folder. Like, he knows how to do that stuff.
hmm, okay. So in terms of the well, the comment after, um,
This is why I was saying the stuff about him not making an effort.
yeah, no, that makes it look the top stuff definitely looks higher effort. Um, you have to be willing. So I had trouble passing this to start with. Um, if you want to have a conversation, you have to be willing to learn if you want to have a conversation. This is
Yeah, it's
at
usually
this
done in
stage.
the reverse order. Like, you put this clause and then a comma and then the other one.
Yeah. Um, uh, it wasn't. Just the idea of him giving you advice was one of the things that made it trouble to pass to start with as well. Um,
Yes, that was not the expected response to an impasse.
yeah. But if you like, if I read it, one has to be willing to learn if one wants to have a conversation. It's like, okay, I've proven my willingness to learn, sort of. I don't believe there needs to be anything more than a sincere willingness to learn. Um, this I feel like is one of those tricky statements that's like hard to argue against in principle, but in practice, people regularly like prove that it's false. Um, Sincere willingness is not a method, um, and people can learn without that. So it, anyway, it's not responding to we're at an impasse. Um, this isn't responding to the fact that it's wrong or unclear. Asking for an example sort of is, uh, but yeah, but he's sort of going around that as well. And yeah, we talked about that. Okay. They have
That's a
lists and stuff
response to
too.
someone else. Don't worry about it.
Oh, okay, cool. Whoops. Uh, yeah. So didn't engage and the chain. So I've read some of this before, not in great detail. But there's a reasonable, what looks like a few thousand words, 2,000 words maybe, on um, Impasse Chains. So that's a fair amount of explanation about what they are. Um,
Yeah. So I'd suggest you read that article for our next session and analyze this impasse chain discussion more because we're not going to finish
yeah,
it now.
yeah, okay. That's fine, but that sounds like a good thing to do. So it's 1,500 words that essay, by the way. So if I'm asking you to show me how the math tree should look in your opinion, and I have showed you how I think it should look in my opinion, and you're unwilling to put forth the effort to show what the math tree should look like, then that is evidence that you share some responsibility in the impasse, and you aren't interested in helping me learn to use the conversation tree the way you think it should be used. Um, that's one sentence with no commas, I think. Um,
Yeah, you're
that's at least
correct. That is quite
at
long for
least
zero punctuation.
I was reading it like slowly breaking up the clauses, but then it was where is the proper break gonna be? This is a long list. Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna
okay.
look for the conjunctions. If and and then that and implied that. Yeah, that's quite a few conjunction type things going on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
So one thing that occurs to me as well is like, what would be a better response?
Uh-huh.
And so, um, like, because I feel like at this point it's pretty obvious that he, he's like, okay, so there's an impasse, and it's like, okay, impasse chain, there's a link to stuff. It's like if you just keep doing what you've been doing, then why would you expect anything to be different? Um, and I mean, my impressions in general is that when you like engage with people under this sort of stuff, you're like pretty willing to respond positively to like sincere effort to like not cause more problems. So like if Gavin had said at this stage, like, okay, um, I don't want to cause any more impasses and I'm serious about trying to fix this. I've read your thing. I'm wondering what you know, what you think the next thing I should do is, or something like that. It's like, would that like add to the impasse chain or count as not an impasse? Um, my impression is that it doesn't add to the chain. Is that that's like the first time someone does that, then that's potentially okay. If they then continue that sort of thing, then it's more chain though. Um,
You could try to write down some examples of what you mean.
Mm.
That might be a good thing to do for next time.
I was thinking, yeah, that would be that as I go along with each sort of thing. Like, I mean, I'm not sure. It'll just be the. Is this? Did he just
Yes.
repeat the same? Okay.
Except,
Um,
see, he changed
the
the
reply
parent.
number. Uh, what is to? Okay, that's the main impasse thing.
Yeah.
Is this one just to the impasse? Okay, this. Well, chronology. Okay. Um, yeah. So one of the things I'm not sure if Oh yeah, I posted a thing. No, that was Gavin. Did I? Anyway, doesn't matter. The One of the things that occurs to me is that in a situation like this, so people don't like doing that. That's the reason I'm mentioning it. Is like you have to deal with the deepest point of contention. Like you can't go back up the tree without resolving the deep stuff. And so here we've got like this chain of 3 or whatever impasses to this point, or 4. You can't then try and skip back up. You've got to like incrementally deal with each thing. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's kind of what
that's a
I think. Impasse number 4, no response to impasse number 3.
yeah. It doesn't matter if impasse 1 is responded to at the moment. It's like yeah, or
That's
maybe it
like,
counts for good faith, but it's not solving the serious issue. But yeah, all right. Yeah, cool. I will analyze this a bit more and make some notes for next time and read debates in Impasse Chains.
impasse
But yeah,
5, no response to impasse 4. Rip.
yeah. Well, I think, by the way, like Impasse Chains make a lot of sense in terms of a way for managing uh, like discussions that in this sort of context, like as opposed to just outright refusing to talk to someone, which is what most people would do after some point and often not discuss it leading up to that point, or having to tolerate stuff continuously that you don't want to. Um, yeah, this is probably the best uh, sort of methodology I've seen so far.
Yeah, the field doesn't have a lot of ideas already taken. There's a lot of room to come up with stuff to solve these sort of discussion problems.
I mean, it's even one of those things where group discussion stuff in like academic things, I can understand why people would have put time into that, but otherwise, like there isn't. It's not. It's barely even a term on Google. Like
Yeah, and some of that
there's
stuff was just like Socrates, like which is over 2,000 years old.
yeah, um, yeah, not much contribution.
And yeah, focus groups are like a specific thing used
Well, and
by big companies and whatever. But
usually with specific goals as well. Like they want to elicit particular. It's not about
yeah,
arbitrary conversation or yeah. So it's
yeah,
highly
they
focused
know
by
stuff
comparison.
about how to run focus groups. It's just a totally different situation than what we're dealing with.
Seems similar to
They're not
philosophy in a lot of ways.
regular debates or conversations or whatever.
Yeah, they're a they're a narrow microcosm with not much reach by comparison to the broader sort of thing. Sort of yeah, discussion groups about woodworking versus discussion groups about philosophy have sort of similar relationships. Okay, cool. I'll do some stuff on this before next time. I guess that's it. We'll see you in 4 days.
Yep. Okay. Bye.